Hi, friends. Welcome to the Hey Fundraiser podcast. I'm your host, Mary Peterson, and whether you're a frontline fundraiser, an executive director, a board member, or someone just wanting to make an impact in your community, this podcast is for you. We cover all facets of fundraising, and our main objective is to give you ideas and inspiration to help you raise more money. Join us as we grow, learn, and make an impact together. Hey, fundraiser. I want to start today with a bit of a confession. Years ago, I walked into a donor meeting with a beautiful proposal, a clear need, and a well-rehearsed pitch, and I completely blew the solicitation. Well, and I'm hoping this is a judgment-free zone. It wasn't because I said the wrong number or asked for the wrong amount. It wasn't because the donor wasn't capable of making the gift. The reason is because I never asked permission to ask for the gift in the first place. This meeting with this donor changed how I approach every donor conversation since that day. And that was like 10 years ago. It was this moment where I stopped trying to convince donors and I started learning how to invite them into the mission. So today we are going to talk about something that can dramatically shift your major gift results, especially if you've ever felt like your conversations are stalling, your asks are landing flat, you don't know when it's the right time to ask for a major gift. The solution is called permission-based fundraising. And this is not just a technique, fundraiser. This is a mindset. It is a methodology for calibrating with your donor and moving them forward in a really strategic, methodical way. In this episode, I'm going to show you exactly what permission-based fundraising is, why it works so well with high net worth individuals, and how you can start using this immediately to help you build deeper trust, increase alignment with your prospects and donors, and close more joyful gifts. Let's start with the definition of permission-based fundraising. So when you're thinking about permission-based fundraising, what it is exactly is asking for permission at every single step during moves management. Whenever you end a text exchange, whenever you're ending a phone call, a meeting, a coffee, even an email exchange, you always want to agree to next steps with your donor. This means that you have to be like 2 or 3 steps ahead of where your donor is. Essentially, permission-based fundraising is like getting a donor's green light at every step. What are they interested in? What ideas do they have? What kind of timing are they thinking about with the gifts? And some people say, well, permission-based fundraising can kind of be passive. No, it is strategically respectful, actually. So there's a really big difference between making a pitch and asking for a gift or making a permission-led invitation. So what we're talking about here is whenever you are ending anything, any kind of conversation with a donor, you need to have what your next step is and then ask them if it's okay to pursue that next step. So I want to share a couple of my favorite lines, and I'll link these in the show notes. But here are some really good examples that I have used in the past just to keep donors on track. And by the way, I can't remember if I've talked about this on the podcast or not, but I'm a big believer in keeping the ball in your court, in your fundraising court. Because what happens is when you give the ball away, especially, to a donor, sometimes that gets dropped. So I would never say to a donor, give me a call next week when you have time and we'll schedule that tour. Oh, no. I would say, I'm going to call you next week to schedule that tour. So you're always the one that's leading the relationship. You're always the one that's reaching out. I mean, donors, of course, can reach out to you too, which is lovely. But when it comes to moving the relationship from cultivation to solicitation, it's very important that you lead. And the way you can do that is through permission-based fundraising. Okay, so I'm just going to give you 3 or 5 examples here. Like you might be ending a coffee with a donor and that you have found out, and I'll just make up an example here, that you have found out that they love helping your museum bring in a new traveling exhibit. Like they love the old collections, but they really just want to help bring in new collections to the museum. So if I was ending that meeting and I had just identified exactly what they care about, I would say something like, Nancy, would it be okay if I shared an idea that I really think aligns with your passion for bringing in traveling exhibits? Now, she's going to say yes because she's going to think, oh my gosh, I need to hear this idea. So this is permission-based fundraising. Here's another really good example. Would it feel good to explore how you might be part of this? Or would you rather stay in learning mode a bit longer? I love this question because it allows the donor to answer, like, are you ready to explore how you might make a gift? Or would you like to, or do you need to learn more? So essentially, by asking for permission, your donors and prospects are guiding you through the moves management process at their pace. Here's another great example. Are you open to a conversation about what meaningful support could look like, even if it's not today? This is another great example where you're saying, I want to ask you for a gift. Are you open to that conversation? I don't want to have it today, but can we talk about this? And I've even been so bold. And I know if you've seen me speak at a Major Gift Momentum event, if you've seen me through my coaching and things like that, you know that on one of the first 2 to 3 donor visits, if I qualify a donor, I am going to ask that donor point blank. And I know this is bold, but bold builds trust. So what I'll say to the donor is, not today, not tomorrow, but would it be okay if I came to ask you for a gift at some point? This would be when I know exactly where your passion lies and I can match up the most perfect program with your passion. Would that be okay? Now, most people say yes. I mean, they want to continue the conversation, or they'll say no, in which case you want to bless and release and move on to other prospects. So I'm going to link like my top 10 permission-based examples, questions that you can ask prospects and donors in the show notes. But essentially, the one I want to leave you with, which I think is probably the most important permission-based question, is the meeting before you have a solicitation. You need to let them know that you're planning to ask, and you need to ask permission to ask for a gift. So the way that I phrase that is I would say something like, Tim, I know where your passion lies. I have matched that up to, I think, the perfect program or project. And the next time we meet, I'd like to talk to you about a significant commitment. Would that be okay? Now, you're going to get one of 3 responses. One is, yes, that would be lovely. In which case, they know you're going to ask for a gift. They're not going to be surprised. They're not going to run out of the room. They're not going to have this, you're not going to go through this awkward silence when you ask and there's like, this like 5-second weirdness. Like you've given them the heads up. It just releases so much pressure. So you're going to get either a yes or you're going to get a no, in which case they're just not ready to be asked. And that's okay too, because I'd rather know that than ask and get a no. Or the third example, and this happens a lot, fundraiser, so I just want you to be prepared, is that curiosity gets the best of us sometimes. And been times when I've said to a donor, hey, next time we come together, I'd like to talk to you about a gift. I've got something really cool in mind. They'll say, well, let's not wait. Like, what are you thinking? So you actually have to be prepared with your solicitation because some people are just going to want to know. They can't wait. And I kind of love that too. So those are some really good questions. Again, I'm going to link some questions in the show notes, but I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of permission. So people in our society, they love autonomy, and they don't want to be told what to do. But if you can get them to agree with you on next steps, then that builds trust. Even though you're leading the conversation, that builds trust. They're leaning in. They've said yes. That trust ultimately lends to giving. So when you respect donors like this, when you are constantly asking for permission for next steps and you're constantly getting yeses, what's happening is you're respecting the relationship. The donor feels respected. They're actually going to have increased satisfaction before the gift is even made. They're going to feel like the amazing person that they are. So this is just some of the psychology. I mean, when you're asking questions and the answer is always yes. So let's say I'm ending a coffee meeting and I say, James, I'd love to follow up with you next week to see if we can get that tour on the books. Like, it is time for you to come see this program. I just think you're going to love it. Would that be okay? He's going to say yes. He's going to come to the tour. At the end of that tour, I'm going to say, James, I'd love to introduce you to a board member. Can I reach out maybe next week or in the coming weeks to get a lunch on the schedule? Because I really think you're going to hit it off with this board member. Like, you're a person in finance. This is the chair of our finance committee. You two are just going to geek out over awesome stuff. He's going to say yes. And then when you go to that lunch, you're going to say, James, next time we connect, I would really like to talk to you about a gift to this program. Would that be okay? He's going to say yes. When you sit down to make that ask, he has said yes so many times. What do you think he's going to say when you sit down to ask? He's going to say yes. This is why permission-based fundraising is just where it's at. So fundraiser, let's talk about where sometimes we get it wrong. And this is where permission-based fundraising really can keep you on track. So a lot of times when we're talking to somebody about a program or a project, and they're leaning in, they're listening, they're nodding, they're asking good questions. Many times we assume that because they're showing interest, that they're ready to make a gift. That is not always the case. Like, this is where I have fumbled a lot in my career. Like, I'm assuming they have interest, so I'm assuming that they're ready. Oh, no. Like, you have to ask. The other way that fundraisers get it wrong is they kind of rush into the ask without context or connection. And believe me, been in this chair, sat in the seat, bought the t-shirt. I have asked for gifts too quickly. I've waited too long and kind of sometimes missed my moment. I in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to ask Shirley, the next time I sit down with her, I'm going to ask her for a gift. Now, poor Shirley had no idea a gift was coming. She's like, oh, I'm just meeting Mary for coffee. And then I totally throw a curveball because I didn't ask permission. So asking permission to solicit is really the best thing ever. Also, fundraisers get it wrong when they send unsolicited proposals. So with some of my coaching clients, I'll often interview their donors, like, to understand, for example, I just recently interviewed a donor who's giving multi-million-dollar gifts to another organization in the same city, but is only giving like 50,000 to my client. And so it was kind of an interesting conversation for me to have, to say, what is holding you back? Like, why don't you think of this organization as one that's worthy of a 7-figure commitment? And one of the things that I hear often is that they get unsolicited proposals. And this goes back to people just needing to get cash in the door and being like, okay, I'm going to ask these 10 people. I'm just going to send proposals. We'll see what comes in. Friends, that never works. So this is why you build relationships that build trust. It's permission-based, and then you close those gifts. And then lastly is fundraisers, oftentimes they'll kind of treat donors like transactions instead of really authentically leaning in and helping them accomplish what they want to accomplish through their philanthropy. So this is when you ask really good cultivation questions. I mean, things like, where do you want your philanthropy to go? Like, what legacy do you want to leave? If you could wave a magic wand, what change in the world would you make? I mean, these are things that help donors feel heard. And then you're going to match your ask or match your programs and projects to what change they want to make. Now, I'm not saying create new programs and projects. I'm saying existing programs and projects that are aligned with what your donors are talking about. So for an example, let's say two fundraisers, same donor. One asks permission if she can share impact and talk to this person about a gift. The other just jumps in and says, would you consider a gift of $100,000? Who do you think built a better relationship? And then who do you think is going to get that gift? So just a little bit about where fundraisers go wrong. Let's dig into the tactical for a second. Like I really want to give you amazing permission-based questions that are very practical that you can start asking your donors today. So some of these examples would be, would you be open to learning more about X or Y or Z? Another good example is, would it feel good to explore next steps? See, I'm not asking if it's okay. I'm asking about their feeling. Would it feel good to explore next steps? That's a totally different question than would it be okay to explore next steps? Like you're literally saying, are you feeling this? And then another good way to put it is, if you're curious, I could share the vision we're building. Would you like to hear more? They're going to say yes. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. Like you have to ask these questions. You have to respect where the donors are in their journey. And then you have to keep the relationship ball in your court. So just a couple more musings about permission-based fundraising. So I've been using it for the last 10 years in my own fundraising. I've been coaching people on it and speaking all over the country. And one of the questions that I often get about it is, well, when you ask permission, doesn't it slow down the process of closing the gift? And the answer is absolutely not. It actually strengthens the process. It actually speeds up the process. So you might have listened to a podcast that I put out before about closing the largest gift I'm probably ever going to close, which was a $100 million gift. When I closed that gift, in the very first face-to-face meeting I had with this couple, I'd never met them before. I'd built a little bit of a phone relationship, but in the very first face-to-face meeting, I said to that couple, at some point, I would like to talk to you about a significant gift to the hospital that I was raising money for. They said, okay. And they said, we're completely open to that. We understand. I mean, they're pretty savvy philanthropists. But what that did was that set the tone for the relationship very early on. And then everything I did just got us closer to that ask. So it doesn't slow down the process. It actually speeds things up because people are anticipating an ask. And oftentimes when I didn't ask in the time that the donor wanted me to ask, they would bring it up. They would say, you a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, you mentioned a gift. Like, when do you think you're going to talk to me about that? So it really kind of calibrates the relationship and makes it stronger. It also, when you respect people's decisions, whether they say yes or no, or now's not the right time, I mean, essentially what you're doing is you're giving them dignity. You're not putting them in an awkward situation of having an ask that they have to say no to. And you're not putting yourself in an awkward position where you are going to make an ask and you don't know what the answer is going to be. So this is really about respecting people's choices and where they are. The other thing is this type of fundraising, it actually leads to repeat gifts, deeper relationships, and frankly, more joyful giving. So when you're constantly agreeing to next steps with your prospects, they're feeling ownership. They're saying, yes, no, I do want to do this. I don't want to do this. but it helps you respect their boundaries, understand where they're coming from, and it just builds trust. And trust leads to repeat gifts, deeper relationships, and philanthropy. I mean, not just charity or giving, but true philanthropy. So I want you to think of yourself as a guide. You are guiding someone through the journey of making a gift. You're not a salesperson. You're not just trying to, meet these metrics of making these cold calls and all the things. Like, you truly are a guide and a leader in the relationship. So I was talking to one of my coaching clients recently, and they phrased it in a really interesting way that kind of stuck with me. So when you're constantly agreeing to next steps, they called it getting micro yeses, like long before you get the ask. And I kind of just loved that, because by the time you're there talking about a gift or talking about numbers, they're already leaning in. So what this does is it really helps you understand where the prospect is. You're getting micro yeses along the way. And then when it's time to ask for a gift, my gut is you are going to get another yes. So permission-based fundraising, at the end of the day, it removes friction. It allows you to co-create the relationship with donors. You're not trying to close a deal, you're building buy-in. And when people feel ownership over the relationship, over the journey, generosity follows. So I just want to leave you with some of those thoughts, fundraiser, because permission-based fundraising, I think you should absolutely sprinkle it into your fundraising efforts as soon as possible, because you are going to start to see a big change in how quickly your relationships move forward, how easy it is for donors to say yes, and then how easy it is to ask for that major gift. Okay, fundraiser, until next time. Hey, fundraiser, thanks so much for being here today. Did you know that we create a special page for each episode that contains helpful links, episode highlights, standout quotes, and freebies? Check it out in today's podcast description. If you loved what you heard today, would you kindly give us a rating and review? It really helps other fundraising professionals find our Hey Fundraiser community. I'm Mary Peterson, and thank you for listening.